On their wedding night, the billionaire touched the young woman's trembling hands, and what he discovered changed everything forever. She cried in silence, her hands cold as ice, but it wasn't him she feared. What devastating secret forced her to accept this marriage with a stranger? Tell me, where are you watching from? Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to discover this love story that will move you from beginning to end. The clock in the presidential suite of the Plaza Hotel struck 11 at night when Eliza Hartwell felt the world stop beneath her feet. Her hands, small and rough from years of kneading bread, trembled like autumn leaves as she observed the platinum ring that now weighed on her left ring finger. It wasn't the physical weight that overwhelmed her, but what it symbolized: a contract, a transaction, a sale disguised as marriage. Sometimes the most painful decisions are the only ones that can save us, she thought as she contemplated the New York skyline through the vast windows of the luxurious room. Nathaniel Blackwood remained silent, watching her from across the room. At 45, the telecommunications magnate had built an empire with the same precision with which he now studied his young wife. His eyes, a steely gray that rarely revealed any emotion, scanned the trembling figure of the 22-year-old woman who now carried his surname. When their hands met for the first time as husband and wife, he felt something that all his billion-dollar empire had never been able to buy: vulnerability. Her hands were cold as ice, but they weren't trembling from fear of him. They trembled from the enormity of the sacrifice she had just made. Eliza cried silently, tears sliding down her cheeks like liquid pearls under the dim light of the crystal chandeliers. At that moment, in the perfumed twilight of New York's most exclusive suite, the ruthless business magnate realized that in his hands he held not a conquest, but a fragile soul who needed something far beyond the luxury he could provide. "I didn't expect you to come," he finally said, breaking the silence with a voice that, usually hard as granite in corporate meetings, sounded strangely soft. "I thought you would run." The young woman raised her eyes, her deep brown eyes carrying a weight no one her age should bear. "I don't have that luxury," she answered with disarming honesty. Nathaniel approached slowly, took a silk robe from the closet, and placed it gently over Eliza's shoulders. His movements were measured, as if he feared she might break at the slightest touch. "Why me?" she suddenly asked, facing him for the first time since the ceremony. "How could have chosen anyone?" A shadow crossed Nathaniel's face as he poured 2 glasses of champagne that neither would drink that night. "Because in your eyes, I saw something impossible to fake," he replied after a moment of reflection. "Integrity." In the silence that followed, both understood that this night marked the beginning of something indefinable. It wasn't love, it wasn't desire, not even friendship. It was an agreement between 2 souls wounded by different but equally devastating circumstances. He didn't touch her beyond that first handshake. He simply lifted the phone and ordered chamomile tea from room service as he contemplated the young woman who had accepted a loveless marriage to save her family from ruin. Outside, New York continued its nightlife, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding in that room, where 2 strangers began a dance of convenience that neither suspected how it would end. The aroma of cinnamon, fermented dough, and crystallized orange filled the small establishment in the heart of Greenwich Village. Hartwell's Bakery had fed generations of New Yorkers for nearly 60 years, since grandmother brought her recipes from Vermont. Now, however, the walls of old tiles and worn wooden counters seemed to contain more memories than hopes. Eliza caressed the old iron mixer, a silent witness to decades of family work, as she watched her mother Rosemary attend to the few regular customers who still preferred their artisanal breads to the industrial offerings of the big chains. "How's Dad today?" she asked, removing the cashmere coat that Nathaniel had insisted on giving her, an item that felt like an imposture in that environment of flour and honest work. Rosemary sighed as she wiped her hands on her worn apron. "The same. The physiotherapist says there's small progress, but—" Her voice broke slightly. "The latest hospital bill came this morning." Eliza nodded silently, aware that despite the money now flowing thanks to her marriage, the accumulated debt was a bottomless pit threatening to devour the family business and her father's health. She headed to the back where Mason, her 19-year-old brother, struggled with the old brick ovens. "Damn, these things are impossible," the young man grumbled, frustrated by the irregular temperature ruining another batch of sourdough loaves. Eliza approached, adjusted the ventilation registers with the expertise of someone raised among doughs and ovens, and smiled slightly as the heat stabilized. "What's it like living with him?" Mason asked abruptly, without looking at her. "With your husband?" The word hung in the hot bakery air, loaded with implications neither dared to name. "It's correct," Eliza replied, carefully choosing her words. "I have my own space." Mason let out a bitter laugh. "Correct? Is that how you describe the man who practically bought my sister?" "Mason," Rosemary's voice, normally soft, cut through the air like a knife. "Your sister made a sacrifice none of us had the right to ask for. The least she deserves is our respect." The young man lowered his eyes, ashamed but still overflowing with impotence. Eliza took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Listen well," she said with a firmness that surprised them both. "He didn't buy me. I made a decision, and every morning when I wake up in that house that doesn't feel like a home, I would make it again if it meant Dad gets the treatment he needs, and this place," her eyes swept across the bakery with infinite love, "remains ours." Mason's hug was sudden and fierce, as when they were children and she protected him from the taunts of other neighborhood boys. "I miss you," he murmured against her shoulder, suddenly more boy than man. "And I miss you all," she replied, allowing herself for a brief moment the vulnerability she forbade in her new life as a trophy wife. "But I'm here now, and we're going to make this bakery shine like never before." She put on an apron, tied back her hair, and began to knead as if the last 3 months of marriage to one of the most powerful men in America had never existed. Her hands, which the night before had held crystal glasses at a high society dinner, now sank into the dough with the familiarity of someone returning to their true self. What no one knew was that Nathaniel Blackwood, from his car discreetly parked on the corner, watched the scene through the bakery's foggy window, with an indecipherable expression on his usually impassive face. Nathaniel Blackwood's penthouse in the elegant Upper East Side seemed to exist in a parallel dimension to the colorful bustle of Greenwich Village. Black marble surfaces, Italian designer furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of New York composed a scene of cold, calculated luxury, where each object seemed to have been selected for its value as an investment rather than any emotional connection. During the first months, Eliza moved through that space like an intruder, afraid to leave marks on the immaculate surfaces or disturb the precise symmetry of that alien world. Her breakfasts were silent and solitary. Nathaniel invariably left before dawn and returned long after midnight. That February morning, however, something altered the established routine. Upon entering the ultra-modern kitchen, she found Nathaniel seated at the central island, reading reports while drinking black coffee. "Good morning," he said, without raising his eyes, his voice as neutral as that of a polite stranger in an elevator. "Good morning," she replied, momentarily disoriented by his unusual presence. "Would you like me to prepare something for breakfast?" Nathaniel finally raised his eyes from his documents, studying her with an intensity that made her suddenly conscious of her simple nightgown and disheveled hair. "You know how to cook?" The question sounded genuinely surprised. An involuntary laugh escaped Eliza's lips. "I grew up in a bakery, Nathaniel. Of course I know how to cook." Something like curiosity momentarily crossed the businessman's usually expressionless face. "We never talked about that," he commented, as if just noticing an insignificant detail in a complex negotiation. "About your life before." Eliza moved around the kitchen with a newly discovered familiarity, extracting ingredients from cabinets she rarely used. "You never asked," she responded simply as she beat eggs. The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken realities. Indeed, in the 3 months they had been married, he had never shown interest in knowing anything about her, beyond what was strictly necessary to maintain appearances at occasional social events. "My father fell ill a year ago," she suddenly began, while preparing an omelette. "A massive stroke. The doctors said it was impossible for him to survive, but he did. However, the medical bills—" Her hands worked with mechanical precision as she spoke, cutting potatoes into thin slices. "The bakery was already struggling. The big chains were suffocating us. And then the hospital debt became unmanageable. The aroma of olive oil and potatoes began to fill the aseptic kitchen, subtly transforming it. And then my offer appeared?" Nathaniel's voice sounded strangely reflective, Eliza turned the omelette with an expert movement. Then your lawyer appeared with a contract and a solution that seemed straight out of a Victorian novel, marriage in exchange for settling our debts. She placed the plate before him with a gesture that defied her usual deference. What I don't understand is why. Of all the women in New York, why choose the daughter of a bankrupt baker? Nathaniel contemplated the omelette for a moment that seemed to extend indefinitely. Then, to Eliza's surprise, he took a fork and tasted a bite. His eyes closed briefly, as if savoring something beyond the food. "It's delicious," he said, evading the question. Then, after a calculated silence, he added, "My assistant will send someone to check the bakery's ovens. They must be outdated." Eliza visibly tensed. "We don't need charity." "It's not charity," he replied with that cold negotiator's voice. "It's investment. The Blackwood name is now tied to that business. Its reputation affects mine." Before Eliza could respond, Nathaniel consulted his watch, stood up, and adjusted his impeccable tie. "I have a video conference with Shanghai in 15 minutes. Thank you for breakfast." And so, as abruptly as he had appeared in her morning routine, he left, leaving Eliza with more questions than answers, and the strange feeling that, for the first time, she had glimpsed something human beneath the facade of the ruthless magnate with whom she had agreed to share her life. Nathaniel Blackwood's personal library occupied an entire room in the east wing of the penthouse. Walls lined with dark wood housed thousands of volumes organized with military precision, from centuries-old economics tomes to the latest publications on financial technology. It was an intellectual sanctuary that reflected its owner's analytical mind. Or so Eliza believed until that April afternoon, when an unexpected storm forced her to seek refuge in the mansion instead of visiting her family as she did every Thursday. Wandering through spaces that still felt alien after 4 months of marriage, she ventured into the library, a place she had avoided as she considered it too personal. Her fingers traced the leather-bound spines when she found it, a small compartment hidden behind a complete edition of Das Kapital by Marx. The irony didn't escape her as she extracted, with reverent care, a worn collection of poetry books. Walt Whitman, Robert Frost, Emily Dickinson, Langston Hughes. Handled volumes with folded corners and, most surprisingly, pages filled with handwritten annotations in the margins. The handwriting was small, precise, undoubtedly Nathaniel's, but it conveyed an emotion that its owner never showed in person. "In these verses I find the soul that the business world forced me to bury," said a note next to a Whitman poem. Eliza suddenly felt like an intruder, an unwitting witness to an intimacy that wasn't hers to observe. She was about to return the books to their hiding place when the door opened. "I see you found my secret," said Nathaniel from the threshold, his voice free of the accusation she expected. Eliza turned, still holding a copy of Leaves of Grass, as if it were evidence of a crime. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to—" "Don't apologize," he interrupted, approaching with measured steps. "It's refreshing to have someone in this house show interest in something beyond numbers in a bank account." He took the book from her hands, their fingers briefly brushing in a contact that sent an inexplicable shiver down Eliza's spine. "I celebrate myself and sing myself," he recited in a low voice, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "And what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul," she automatically completed, surprising them both. Nathaniel looked at her then, truly looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "You read poetry too?" A nostalgic smile drew itself on Eliza's lips. "My father would read us poems while we waited for the dough to ferment. He said beautiful words made the bread taste better." A different silence settled between them, not the usual uncomfortable silence of strangers forced to cohabitate, but one loaded with unexplored possibilities. "Your father sounds like a wise man," commented Nathaniel, returning the book to its place with almost reverential care. "He is," she replied, and then, with an audacity she didn't know she possessed, added, "You should meet him someday, not just through medical reports and bank statements." She expected rejection, perhaps even indignation at her boldness. Instead, Nathaniel nodded slowly. "Perhaps I will," he said, and for a fleeting instant, Eliza glimpsed vulnerability in those usually expressionless eyes. "There are aspects of our agreement that we should discuss." The moment of connection dissipated as quickly as it had arisen when Nathaniel's phone vibrated in his pocket. After checking the screen, his face recovered that impenetrable professional mask. "I need to take this," he excused himself, heading for the door. He paused briefly at the threshold, as if wanting to add something more, but finally left without looking back. That night, moved by an impulse she didn't bother to analyze, Eliza wrote a quote from Emily Dickinson on a small paper that she slipped between the pages of a book she knew he was reading. "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul." The next day, the paper had disappeared. And in its place she found another with a precise and elegant handwriting, "and sings the tune without the words, and never stops at all." Thus began a silent dialogue between two souls that, perhaps, were not as different as they seemed. May brought to New York an explosion of cherry blossoms and an unusual humidity that presaged a suffocating summer. For Eliza, however, it brought something much more disturbing: her father's relapse. "We need to transfer him to a specialized clinic," explained the doctor in the waiting room of the public hospital, where Walter Hartwell had been admitted for 3 days. "His recovery has significantly regressed. He needs intensive therapy, advanced neurological rehabilitation." Rosemary, aged 10 years in recent months, clutched a worn handkerchief in her hands. "And the cost?" The figures the doctor mentioned made Mason let out a desperate laugh. "With that we could buy another bakery." "We'll cover it," Eliza intervened firmly. "Make all the necessary arrangements." Later, in the small hospital cafeteria, Mason confronted her with a mixture of gratitude and resentment on his young face. "Now it's we? You and your millionaire husband?" "Don't be unfair," interceded Rosemary, though the same question shone in her tired eyes. Eliza contemplated the watery coffee in her disposable cup. 5 months had passed since her wedding, 5 months living a double life that was tearing her apart inside. During the day, she was the perfect wife of magnate Nathaniel Blackwood, occasionally accompanying him to events where she smiled politely while being evaluated by New York high society. In the afternoons, she was Eliza Hartwell again, with flour under her nails and her heart in the family bakery that struggled to stay alive. "The situation is more complicated than you imagine," she finally said, carefully choosing her words. "Nathaniel isn't what I expected. Does he mistreat you?" Mason's question was direct, his body instinctively tensing. "No, no," she hastened to clarify. "It's the opposite. He's correct, distant, but respectful. We have our separate spaces, our parallel lives. We meet at some dinners, exchange polite words. It's like living with an extremely polite stranger. But," she continued after a pause, "something is changing. These last few months, we've started to communicate in unexpected ways." She didn't mention the poetic notes, the occasional breakfasts shared in contemplative silence, the glances that lasted a second longer than necessary. These were details so fragile, she feared they would vanish if named. "Are you developing feelings for him?" asked Rosemary with a mother's sharp intuition. "I don't know," Eliza honestly replied, "but I know I need to make a decision about my role in this marriage. I can't continue divided between two worlds." It was then that she decided. If she was going to be Nathaniel Blackwood's wife, she would be completely, but on her own terms, not as a silent ornament, but as a true companion. And that meant being involved in all aspects of her life, including the family bakery that meant so much to her. That same night, she waited for Nathaniel in the main living room. It was nearly 2 in the morning when the door opened and he entered, loosening his tie with a tired gesture. "Eliza," he said, visibly surprised to find her awake. "Has something happened?" She stood up, facing him directly. "My father has relapsed. He needs specialized care. I'll give instructions to—" "No," she interrupted him firmly. "It's not just about money. I need you to understand something. The bakery isn't just a business for us. It's our history, our identity, and I'm going to fight to keep it alive." Nathaniel observed her with an indecipherable expression, his body absolutely still. "Starting tomorrow, I'll be working there every afternoon," she continued, with a determination she didn't know she possessed. "Not as a hobby, but as Walter Hartwell's daughter that I am. If this interferes with your plans for the perfect wife you imagined, then perhaps we should reconsider our agreement." She expected resistance, perhaps even anger. She didn't expect the slight smile that drew itself on Nathaniel's usually serious lips. "The perfect wife I imagined doesn't exist, Eliza," he said, with surprisingly soft voice. And I'm glad to discover that the woman I married has more depth than any fantasy could offer. He took a step towards her, diminishing the physical and emotional distance they always maintained. Do what you need to do. I only ask one thing. What? She asked, suddenly conscious of his proximity. That you allow me to know that part of you too. The real Eliza. The one who belongs to the bakery and to Whitman's verses. His eyes, normally cold as steel, shone with an emotion she had never seen before. I think it's time our marriage be more than a contract, don't you think? And so, under the dim light of the New York dawn that began to filter through the windows, they made a silent decision that would change the course of their lives forever. The bakery shone under the golden light of the June afternoon. Eliza had spent the morning experimenting with an old recipe for sourdough that her grandmother had brought from Vermont decades ago. Her hands worked the dough with precise, almost meditative movements as she softly hummed a forgotten melody. She didn't notice the presence observing her from the door until a shadow altered the quality of the light. When she looked up, the spoon she was holding fell to the floor with a metallic clatter. "Nathaniel, what are you doing here?" He remained at the threshold, incongruous in his tailored suit in the middle of the modest neighborhood bakery. For the first time since she had known him, he seemed slightly uncomfortable, out of his element. "You said you wanted me to know this part of you," he replied, his eyes scanning the space with genuine curiosity. "So here I am." Mason, who was kneading in a corner, visibly tensed. Rosemary, however, stepped forward with the natural dignity that characterized her. "Welcome to our humble business, Mr. Blackwood," she said, wiping her floured hands on her apron. "It's an honor to receive you." "The honor is mine, Mrs. Hartwell," replied Nathaniel with a formality that failed to hide a certain unusual shyness in him. "And please call me Nathaniel." The following minutes passed in an uncomfortable dance of courtesies until Eliza, impatient, took her husband by the arm and led him to the back. "I'll show you how everything works," she declared, with a decision that admitted no objections. To her surprise, Nathaniel let himself be guided docilely, listening with genuine attention as she explained the fermentation process, the importance of oven temperature, the secrets of the sourdough starter they had maintained for generations. He asked intelligent questions, observed the details with that analytical look that had built financial empires. "It's fascinating," he commented, as he watched Eliza shape a loaf of bread with expert movements. "Your whole life is in your hands when you do this. It's noticeable." She paused, surprised by the depth of the observation. "It's exactly like that. When I need, I feel connected to my grandmother, to all the women who kept this tradition alive. It's continuity, something that money can't buy," he murmured, more to himself than to her. It was then that Eliza noticed something unusual on his hands, small recent burns and blisters. "What happened?" she asked, instinctively taking his fingers between hers to examine them. Nathaniel seemed momentarily disconcerted by the contact. "It's nothing. A personal project." Before she could inquire further, the bakery phone rang. Rosemary answered, her face transforming as she listened. "It's the hospital," she announced with a tense voice. "Your father is conscious. He wants to see us." The joy that lit up Eliza's face was so pure, so genuine, that Nathaniel felt an inexplicable knot in his throat. "Go," he said softly. "I'll take care of closing up here." "But you don't know how—" "I learn fast," he interrupted her with a smile he rarely showed. "Besides, your brother can supervise me, right, Mason?" The young man, who had observed the entire scene with suspicion, nodded curtly. Eliza hesitated only for an instant before taking off her apron, impulsively kissing Nathaniel's cheek and running out with her mother. The silence that followed between the two men was as dense as unbaked dough. "You don't deserve her," Mason finally said, with the brutal frankness of youth. "I know," replied Nathaniel, surprising the young man. "But I'm trying to change that." They worked side by side for the following hours, the magnate following the young baker's instructions with a humility that belied his ruthless reputation in the business world. As the afternoon fell, something in the tension between them began to soften. "Why did you really marry my sister?" Mason finally asked as they cleaned the counters. "And don't tell me it was for her integrity. Men like you don't value those things." Nathaniel stopped his movements, carefully considering his response. "Perhaps that's the problem. Men like me have forgotten to value what really matters. He approached the window, contemplating the busy Greenwich Village street as he continued. I married your sister because, when I investigated your family, I saw something I had lost long ago. Authenticity. A family that stays together despite everything. That values something beyond money. And why did you need that? Insisted Mason, intuiting there was more to that story. Nathaniel's eyes darkened with painful memories. Because I lost everything when I was about your age. Not money, that came later. I lost trust, faith in people, my own sister. He stopped abruptly, as if he had said too much. Someday, perhaps I'll tell you that story. But not today. Just then the door opened and Eliza entered, her eyes bright with contained tears. Dad is stable, she announced, and then stopped, observing the unusual picture of her brother and her husband working together. What happened here? Your husband isn't completely useless, conceded Mason with a reluctant smile. At least he knows how to follow instructions. Nathaniel laughed softly, a sound Eliza heard for the first time. High praise coming from you. Later, as they returned to the penthouse in the chauffeur-driven car, Eliza broke the contemplative silence that had settled between them. Thank you for today. It meant a lot to me, to my family. Nathaniel took her hand, an intimate gesture he had never initiated before. There's something you should know, Eliza. Something about the agreement we signed. His tone made her instinctively tense. The contract specifies that, if you remain married to me for a full year, your father's hospital debt will be completely forgiven, and the bakery property will be free of encumbrances. I know, she responded cautiously. That's what I signed. What you don't know, he continued with visible difficulty, is that there's an investor interested in buying the property where the bakery stands. A property worth 15 times more than the business itself. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the soft purr of the luxury engine. And that investor, Eliza finally asked, with an almost inaudible voice, has some connection to you. Nathaniel's eyes, when they met hers, were full of guilt and something more, something indefinable. Yes, or at least it had. Until today. The implications of that confession fell upon Eliza like an avalanche, burying the fragile trust she had begun to build. Stop the car, she ordered with a trembling voice. Eliza, please, let me explain. Stop the car now. The vehicle stopped on an unknown street. Without looking back, Eliza opened the door and walked out into the New York night, her heart as shattered as on her wedding day, but for completely different reasons. The following 2 weeks were a silent hell. Eliza returned to the penthouse very late each night and left at dawn, avoiding any possibility of encountering Nathaniel. She slept in the guest room, leaving the majestic master bedroom empty, like a mausoleum of what had never really come to be. Nathaniel, for his part, had tried to explain himself that first night, waiting for her until dawn. Afterwards, he respected her distance with a resignation that bordered on defeat. The poetic notes ceased. The shared breakfast became a distant memory. The fragile connection they had begun to build vanished like mist under the relentless sun of betrayal. The bakery became Eliza's only refuge. She worked there from dawn until well into the night, kneading with fury, baking with obsessive precision, as if she could expel her pain through physical work. You can't continue like this, Rosemary told her on a particularly hot July afternoon, while watching her daughter prepare the 4th batch of the day with eyes reddened by fatigue. You're destroying yourself. I'm fine, she automatically responded, without stopping. No, you're not. Her mother's voice acquired that unusual firmness that emerged in critical moments. And worse, you're not being fair. This caught Eliza's attention, who stopped her movements. Fair? To whom? To the man who planned to destroy our family heritage for economic benefit. Rosemary sat heavily on a small stool, her aged hands resting on her lap. Your father wants to see you. He's lucid enough today. The abrupt change of subject disconcerted Eliza, who nodded mechanically and removed her apron. During the journey to the hospital, she remained silent, lost in her own stormy thoughts. Walter Hartwell's room was illuminated by a soft, natural light. The man, once robust and vibrant, now seemed fragile among the white sheets, but his eyes, the same brown eyes Eliza had inherited, shone with lucidity. My girl, he said with a weak but firm voice. Come here. She approached, taking his hand carefully, as if she feared it might break. "Hello, Dad, you look better." "And you look terrible," he replied with a shadow of his old humor. "Your mother says you're working too much, and that you're not talking to your husband." Eliza shot an accusatory look at Rosemary, who shrugged unapologetically. "Things are complicated, Dad. I don't want to trouble you with that now." "You know what's the only thing that troubles me?" asked Walter, gently squeezing her hand. "Seeing my daughter transform into a reflection of the bitter man I was before I met your mother." The declaration took her by surprise. "What are you talking about?" "Pride, Eliza." "Damn pride." His eyes moistened. "I lived 20 years hating my own brother for a betrayal that never occurred. 20 years lost for not listening, for not asking, for assuming the worst." Eliza sat slowly, feeling that each of her father's words weighed tons. "Your husband came to see me," continued Walter, 3 days ago." "What?" The surprise left her momentarily speechless. "An interesting man. Formal, but with an honesty I didn't expect." Walter smiled weakly. "He told me everything. About the property, about the investor, about how he cancelled the entire deal after really getting to know us." "He could be lying," murmured Eliza, though her conviction faltered. "He could, but he's not." Walter tried to sit up, and she helped him adjust better against the pillows. "You know what he told me? That he had never tasted bread as good as yours. That he understood why we fought so hard for the bakery. That he would do whatever necessary to preserve it. Not for him, not for a contract, but for you." The tears Eliza had been holding back for weeks began to flow silently. "I'm not telling you to forgive him immediately," continued her father. "I'm telling you to listen, to ask. Pride is a lonely companion, believe me, I know well." Before she could respond, a nurse entered to announce that visiting hours were over. With a kiss on her father's forehead and a hug to her mother, Eliza left the hospital for the summer New York night. She didn't go to the bakery, nor did she return directly to the penthouse. Instead, she walked for hours through the city streets, allowing her father's words to resonate in her mind as the moon rose above the skyscrapers. It was past midnight when she finally returned to the luxury apartment building. The night doorman greeted her with a knowing smile as she rose in the private elevator. Upon entering the penthouse, she found it unusually illuminated. Following the light, she reached the kitchen where she stopped, surprised by the vision that greeted her. Nathaniel, the always impeccable business magnate, was standing by the kitchen island, with his shirt sleeves rolled up, hands covered in flour, and an expression of absolute concentration as he tried, without much success, to shape what appeared to be a rudimentary loaf of bread. "What are you doing?" asked Eliza, unable to contain her astonishment. He startled, spilling flour all over the marble surface. His eyes, when they met hers, showed an almost painful vulnerability. "Trying to understand," he responded simply. "Trying to comprehend what this means to you." And at that moment, in that designer kitchen full of spilled flour and fragile hopes, the silence that had separated them for weeks began, very slowly, to vanish. August in New York is a relentless furnace. The asphalt seems to melt under the sun, and the air burns lungs as if it were on fire. In Nathaniel Blackwood's penthouse, however, something more ardent than the New York summer was developing. A fragile attempt at reconstruction. After that night in the kitchen, they had begun to talk again. Cautious conversations at first, superficial, like two exhausted combatants testing an armistice. Eliza had returned to sleeping in the master bedroom, though maintaining a prudent distance. The poetic notes had reappeared, shy but persistent. But trust once broken is like a reconstructed antique vase. The cracks always remain visible. That August morning, Eliza woke up with the feeling that something fundamental had changed in the balance of the universe. Her phone showed 7 missed calls from Mason and a cryptic message, "Come to the bakery now." With her heart racing, she dressed hurriedly. Nathaniel had already left. An important deal in Chicago would keep him away all week. So she took a taxi directly to Greenwich Village. Nothing had prepared her for what she found. The bakery was closed, with an official sign of "Closed by Health Inspection" on the door. Inside, Rosemary cried silently while Mason heatedly argued with 2 suited men. "What's happening?" asked Eliza, entering like a storm. Mason turned to her, his face contorted with rage. "Your wonderful husband, that's what's happening." "What?" "These are health inspectors," he explained, pointing to the men. They say we've violated 17 health regulations, 17, in a business that's been operating for 60 years without a single complaint. The inspectors maintained impassive expressions as Mason continued. And, oh, surprise! The inspection was ordered by a subsidiary company of Blackwood Group. There must be a mistake, murmured Eliza, feeling the ground open beneath her feet. A mistake? Mason's laugh was bitter as gall. Like it was a mistake that they were interested in the property? Like it was a mistake that Dad fell ill just when he refused to sell? How many more mistakes do you need to see the truth? Your brother is upset, Mrs. Blackwood, intervened one of the inspectors. But the facts are clear. This establishment does not comply with current regulations. The closure is temporary until the necessary improvements are made, which, frankly, are extensive and expensive. Rosemary approached then, her face aged by pain. Your father suffered a relapse when he found out. He's under observation at the hospital. Eliza felt the entire world collapse upon her. With trembling hands, she dialed Nathaniel's number. Straight to voicemail. She tried 3 more times with identical results. Now do you understand? Mason asked softly, all his anger transformed into infinite compassion as he saw his sister's devastated face. He never stopped seeing it as business. You, us, the bakery. Just pieces on his board. The following days were a feverish nightmare. Eliza installed herself at the hospital by her father, whose condition had stabilized but remained delicate. She tried to contact Nathaniel incessantly without success. Each hour of silence solidified the terrible suspicion in her heart. She had been betrayed again. On the 3rd day, when exhaustion threatened to overcome her, she received a call from an unknown number. Mrs. Blackwood? The voice was professional, feminine, slightly anxious. I'm Phoebe Reed, personal assistant to your husband. I have instructions to contact you urgently. Where is Nathaniel? Eliza demanded, instinctively tensing. That's the reason for my call, replied the woman. Your husband has been detained in Chicago, accused of tax fraud, market manipulation, and several other charges. The police confiscated all his electronic devices, which is why he hasn't been able to contact you. Eliza dropped into the nearest chair, stunned. Fraud? Nathaniel? That's impossible. Mrs. Blackwood? Phoebe's voice lowered a tone as if she feared being heard. There's evidence suggesting these accusations were fabricated by someone within the company, someone with privileged access to the financial systems. His sister, murmured Eliza, recalling fragments of conversations, vague references to a family betrayal that had never been fully explained. I can't confirm that, replied Phoebe cautiously, but what I can tell you is that we need your help. You have access to documents that could prove your husband's innocence. I do? What documents? In your master bedroom behind the Hopper painting, there's a safe. The combination is the date of your wedding. Inside, you'll find a USB device and documents that your husband prepared precisely for a case like this. Phoebe's voice broke slightly. He always knew she would try to destroy him again. He just didn't expect it would be now. That night, Eliza returned to the penthouse for the first time in days. She found it strangely alien, as if it belonged to another life, to another person. With mechanical steps, she headed to the bedroom and found the safe exactly where Phoebe had indicated. Inside was a thick envelope, with her name written in Nathaniel's unmistakable handwriting, along with a USB device. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. My dear Eliza, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means my worst fears have materialized. I don't know what they've told you about me, what evidence they've shown you, but I ask you to remember one thing. Appearances deceive, especially when they've been carefully constructed by someone who knows all your weak points. It continued explaining, with meticulous details, the complete story. His sister, Victoria, who had tried to sabotage the family company years ago, appropriating millions. How he had discovered and confronted her, offering her a second chance that she refused. How Victoria had sworn to destroy him. Take from you everything you love, as you took from me, were her exact words. On the USB you'll find proof of my innocence, the letter continued. But more importantly, you'll find the truth about your family's bakery. I never ordered that inspection. On the contrary, I had initiated proceedings to declare the business a cultural heritage of New York, to permanently protect it. The final lines of the letter made the tears Eliza had been holding back for days finally flow freely. I don't ask you to believe me. I ask you to follow your instinct, the same that led you to love me when I didn't deserve it, when I was just beginning to discover how to be a man worthy of someone like you. Whatever happens, remember that these months with you have been the only true thing in a life built on appearances and distrust. With all my heart, Nathaniel. In the solitude of that room they had briefly shared as true companions, Eliza faced the most crucial crossroads of her life. Trust or flee, risk her heart once more, or permanently protect herself from pain. And as night advanced over New York, her decision began to take shape, clear as the dawn that would inevitably follow that darkness. The lawyer's office was an austere space of dark wood and heavy curtains, where time seemed to move with deliberate slowness. Seated in a too-rigid chair before an imposing desk, Eliza observed Harrison Wells, Nathaniel's legal representative, as he examined the documents she had brought. "This is extraordinary," murmured the lawyer, adjusting his glasses with a nervous gesture. "If what this USB contains is authentic, we could completely dismantle the case against your husband." Eliza kept her hands firmly clasped in her lap to disguise their trembling. "When can I see him?" "Visits are restricted during the preliminary investigation," replied Wells with a professional tone. "But with this evidence, we could secure his release on bail in a matter of days." Days. The word resonated in Eliza's mind like a sentence. Days in which Nathaniel would remain locked up, accused of crimes he hadn't committed, while his empire, built over decades of relentless work, crumbled before the world's eyes. "There's something else," continued the lawyer, extracting a document from the envelope she had brought. "This sworn declaration about your family's bakery. Your husband had initiated the process to declare it a protected cultural heritage nearly 3 months ago, long before the current problems." Eliza took the document with trembling hands. Indeed, the start date of the proceedings coincided with those first days when Nathaniel had begun to show genuine interest in the family business, when he had visited the bakery for the first time. "The health inspection," she began, with a barely audible voice. "Was ordered by Victoria Blackwood," completed the lawyer, showing her another document. "Using a subsidiary company she still maintains from the time she was part of the group. Your husband had no knowledge or control over this." A bitter laugh escaped from Eliza's lips. It had all been an elaborate trap, not just for Nathaniel, but for her too, to shatter the fragile trust they had begun to build. Upon leaving the office, New York greeted her with a suffocating August afternoon. She automatically headed to the hospital, where her father continued slowly recovering. On the journey, her mind obsessively reviewed every moment, every word, every gesture of the past months. How much of what she had lived was real? How much had been manipulated? Walter's room was in twilight when she entered. The man slept peacefully, his breathing regular as a metronome. Rosemary, seated by the bed, raised her eyes from the book she was reading. "How did it go?" she asked softly. Eliza dropped into the adjacent chair. "You were right, Mom, about Nathaniel, about everything." Rosemary closed the book slowly. "I didn't say it to gloat, daughter. I said it because after 40 years of marriage, I've learned to recognize when a man is truly in love. And that man, with all his flaws and his complicated past, loves you deeply." "How can you be so sure?" The question sprouted from the depths of Eliza's insecurities. Her mother smiled with the serene wisdom that only years bestow. "Because he looks at you the way your father looked at me when we were young, as if you were water in the desert." Eliza contemplated her sleeping father, recalling the words he had told her days ago about pride and the capacity to forgive. "I'm afraid, Mom," she finally confessed, her voice reduced to a vulnerable whisper. "Afraid of trusting and being betrayed again. Afraid of giving my heart completely." "Fear is natural," replied Rosemary, taking her hand. "Love always implies risk. The question is whether that man, with all his complications, is worth that risk for you." That night, Eliza returned to the closed bakery. With the keys she kept, she entered the silent space that had been the center of her universe for so many years. In the twilight, she toured every corner, every surface, allowing memories to flood her. Her father teaching her to recognize when dough was perfectly fermented, her mother decorating King's Day bread, her little brother sleeping on flour sacks while they worked until dawn on Christmas. She reached the old oven, the beating heart of the bakery. She passed her fingers over the refractory stone, still warm despite the days of forced inactivity. And it was there, in the place where her identity had been forged, that she made her decision. The next morning, she returned to Lawyer Wells's office, but she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by Mason, visibly uncomfortable in his only formal suit, and 3 elderly neighborhood residents who had been customers of the bakery for decades. "I need you to do something more than free my husband," she said, with a determination that surprised the lawyer. "I need you to help us file a countersuit. My brother and these neighbors have witnessed intimidation by the supposed inspectors. We have proof." She extracted from her purse an old tin box containing receipts, licenses, and impeccable health certificates spanning 6 decades of history. "Hartwell's bakery has never had a single violation," she continued with a firm voice. "And I won't allow my family's reputation to be tarnished by a personal vendetta against my husband." As the lawyer examined the documents with growing interest, Mason approached his sister. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered. "About him?" Eliza contemplated her brother with a new serenity, born of nights of reflection and tears. "I'm not sure of anything, except that I won't allow fear to dictate my decisions ever again. And that includes the fear of completely loving a complicated man who, against all odds, has found his way to my heart." Mason nodded slowly, recognizing in his sister a strength that had always been there, waiting for the opportunity to fully manifest itself. "Then we'll fight," he said simply, squeezing her hand. "Together as always." And so, as New York surrendered to the torrid August heat, a young woman who had begun a marriage of convenience discovered that her greatest test would not be surviving a commercial agreement disguised as a union, but finding the courage to choose trust over fear and love over certainty. The hotel room in Chicago was impersonal and aseptic, so different from the warmth of the bakery or even the cold elegance of the New York penthouse. Eliza left her small suitcase on the perfectly made bed and approached the window. The city stretched before her, oblivious to her inner storm. A week had passed since they filed the countersuit, 5 days since Lawyer Wells began the proceedings for Nathaniel's release on bail. Each hour of waiting was an exercise in patience she had never had to practice. She sat on the edge of the bed, extracting from her purse the small notebook where she had begun to write her thoughts, a practice she found strangely comforting in those days of uncertainty. "The truth," she wrote with careful handwriting, "is that I'm as afraid of him being guilty as I am of him being innocent. If he's guilty, it means I was completely wrong, that I saw goodness where it didn't exist. But if he's innocent, it means I judged him unjustly, that I doubted when he most needed my trust. I don't know which terrifies me more." The phone interrupted her reflections. It was Wells, with news. The bail hearing would be the next day. They had permission for a supervised visit that same afternoon. The hours until the moment of the meeting passed with exasperating slowness. Eliza changed clothes 3 times, unable to decide what image she wanted to project. The loyal wife? The independent woman? The wounded person who still didn't know if she could completely forgive? She finally opted for simplicity, a navy blue dress without pretensions, and the only accessory that mattered, her wedding ring, which she had continued to wear despite everything. The detention center was a modern building that tried to disguise its function with clean lines and neutral colors. It failed spectacularly. Desperation and anxiety were tangible in the air. They led her to a visiting room where other families conversed in low voices. And then she saw him, Nathaniel Blackwood, the magnate who had built an empire from scratch, the man who inspired fear and respect in the most exclusive financial circles of the country, suddenly seemed vulnerable in his inmate uniform. He had lost weight, and an incipient beard covered his usually impeccable face. When his eyes found Eliza's, something transformed in them. A spark, a flash of something so powerful that she had to hold her breath. "You came," he said simply when she sat across from him, separated by a plastic table. "Of course I came," she replied, surprised by the firmness of her own voice, when inside she was a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. "How is your father?" The question, so considerate amid his own crisis, provoked a knot in Eliza's throat. "Stable. The doctors are optimistic." She paused, studying the face of the man who had gone from being an intimidating stranger to a husband, and finally to something much more complex and indefinable. We found the documents, Nathaniel. Wells is convinced they're enough to dismantle the accusations. He nodded slowly. Victoria was always brilliant, but impatient. She makes mistakes when she acts on impulse. A sad smile curved his lips. Like that time in Chicago when she tried to destroy me for the first time. You never told me that complete story, said Eliza softly. Just fragments. Nathaniel looked beyond her, to some point in the past. My sister and I grew up in difficult conditions. Our father was a violent man. Our mother disappeared when we were small. I promised to protect her always, and for years I did. I took her with me when I started to build the company, trusted her unconditionally. His eyes refocused on Eliza. I discovered she was diverting funds, millions, not out of necessity, but out of, I don't know, some kind of deep resentment. I confronted her, offered her help, therapy, whatever she needed. She laughed in my face, said she had always hated living in my shadow, being Nathaniel Blackwood's sister, that she preferred to destroy everything rather than owe me anything more. Eliza instinctively extended her hand across the table. Nathaniel looked at it for an instant, as if he couldn't believe she was still willing to touch him, and then placed his on hers. The contact, simple but deep, seemed to anchor them both amid the storm. I'm sorry, she said, surprised to really feel it. No one deserves to be betrayed by their own blood. The ironic thing, he continued with a controlled voice, is that I perfectly understand why you distrust me. I've built a life based on transactions, not relationships. Our own marriage began as a contract. How could I blame you for doubting? But it evolved, replied Eliza, surprised by the certainty in her voice. At some point it stopped being an agreement and became something more. For me, that moment was when I saw you in the bakery for the first time, confessed Nathaniel, his eyes suddenly bright. Your hands working the dough, the way you softly sang while kneading. I understood that I had been searching in the wrong places all my life. That true wealth wasn't in bank accounts or properties, but in the capacity to find joy in the simple, in the authentic. A guard approached to indicate that visiting time was ending. Eliza squeezed Nathaniel's hand with renewed strength. Tomorrow you'll be free, she said with a conviction that admitted no doubts. And then we'll have much to rebuild. The word floated between them, loaded with promise and challenge. Rebuild. Not start over, not pretend the wounds didn't exist, but acknowledge them and build something stronger upon them. As they escorted her out of the visiting room, Eliza looked back one last time. Nathaniel remained standing, motionless, his figure silhouetted against the artificial light. He seemed simultaneously powerful and vulnerable, a man on the threshold of a transformation. That night, in the solitude of her hotel room, Eliza returned to her notebook. But instead of doubts and fears, she wrote a single line. Sometimes true love isn't a destination we arrive at, but a path we choose to walk each day, despite fear, despite wounds, despite everything. And for the first time in weeks, she slept deeply, without dreams or nightmares, just the rest of someone who has finally found clarity amid chaos. September arrived in New York with a promise of renewal, bringing with it those first mornings when the suffocating summer heat began to yield to a kinder breeze. At Hartwell's bakery, the metal shutters rose again after weeks of forced closure. Eliza contemplated the renovated interior with a mixture of nostalgia and hope. The old tiles had been restored, not replaced. The wooden counters had been polished to recover their original shine. The old ovens remained intact, though now they scrupulously complied with all modern safety regulations. We preserved its soul, commented Nathaniel by her side, as if reading her thoughts. Just updated what was necessary. 3 weeks had passed since his release, 3 weeks of incessant work, demonstrating his innocence to the world, recovering scared investors' trust, countering the media damage, and simultaneously rehabilitating the bakery, personally supervising every detail to ensure it maintained its unique character while satisfying the most demanding standards. It's perfect, replied Eliza, intertwining her fingers with his. The gesture, once so rare between them, had become natural during those weeks of shared reconstruction. Rosemary entered carrying trays of fermented dough, followed by Mason, who pushed a cart with meticulously organized ingredients. "Good morning to the lovebirds," exclaimed the young man with a mischievous smile. The transformation in his attitude toward Nathaniel had been one of the most surprising changes of the past weeks. Since the successful countersuit, since seeing how the magnate put all his knowledge and resources to defend the family legacy, Mason had gone from open hostility to reluctant camaraderie that evolved day by day. "Ready for the grand reopening?" asked Rosemary, her face illuminated by a renewed vitality. "More than ready," replied Eliza, taking her personalized apron, a gift from Nathaniel that bore the bakery's old logo embroidered alongside her name. "It will be the best sales day in Hartwell's history." "Hartwell Blackwood," Nathaniel softly corrected, causing a blush on Eliza's cheeks that recalled their first days together. They worked side by side all morning, preparing the first batch for the official noon reopening. To everyone's surprise, Nathaniel had revealed himself as a dedicated apprentice during those weeks, mastering basic techniques with the same fierce concentration he applied to business acquisitions. "I never thought I'd see you kneading bread," commented Eliza, as she watched him shape sourdough loaves with increasingly expert hands. "I never thought I'd find so much satisfaction in something so tangible," he replied, with that raw honesty that had characterized their relationship since his return from Chicago. "All my life, I've created abstract value, stocks, bonds, intellectual properties. Never something I could smell, touch, taste." Eliza approached, gently adjusting the position of his hands on the dough. "It's because this isn't just flour and water. It's history, it's memory. It's home," he completed, looking at her with an intensity that made the rest of the world momentarily disappear. The tinkling of the doorbell broke the moment. It was Walter, leaning on a cane but notably stronger than in previous weeks. His recovery had been slow but steady since the bakery received the green light to reopen. "Dad!" exclaimed Eliza, hurrying to carefully embrace him. "For you shouldn't be standing for so long." "Nonsense," grumbled the man with that stubbornness that had kept the business alive for decades. "I wouldn't miss this day for anything in the world." His eyes scanned the renovated space, pausing at each detail, each subtle improvement. Finally, his gaze rested on Nathaniel, who remained slightly apart, respecting the family moment. "Come here, son," he said, extending a hand to his son-in-law. The word son hung in the air, loaded with meaning. Nathaniel approached with an almost reverent expression, taking the offered hand. "You've done good work," continued Walter, pointing to the place with a broad gesture. "But more importantly, you've made my daughter happy, and that's worth more than all the bread in the world." "She saved me," Nathaniel responded simply, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "In every possible way." The bell rang again, interrupting the emotional moment. A group of elderly neighborhood residents, regular customers for decades, entered with expectation. "We're not open yet," warned Mason, hurrying to receive them. "Let them in," Eliza intervened with a smile. Their family, too. What followed was a constant parade of neighbors, local journalists attracted by the story of neighborhood resistance against corporate interests, a narrative that Nathaniel, ironically, had helped construct to divert attention from the true culprits, and even some chefs from prestigious restaurants interested in the traditional methods the bakery preserved. By noon, when the official reopening was scheduled, a considerable line extended down the street. Local television cameras filmed the event. Hartwell's bakery, almost on the brink of extinction months ago, had become a symbol of cultural resistance and authenticity. "This is just the beginning," Nathaniel murmured in Eliza's ear as they observed the scene from the back of the shop. "I have an idea to expand the concept, preserving the traditional, but taking it to other parts of the city. Baking classes for seniors, educational programs for children." Eliza silenced him with a soft but firm kiss. "Always thinking big, aren't you?" "I learned from the best," he replied, embracing her with a naturalness that would have been unthinkable months ago. "The woman who transformed a cold contract into the greatest gift of my life." Together they went out to receive the waiting crowd, not as magnate Nathaniel Blackwood and his young wife, but as equal partners in something much more valuable than any business empire, a shared story of redemption and new beginning. And as the aroma of freshly baked bread filled the street, enveloping those present in that primordial fragrance that connects with the most basic and essential of human being, Eliza understood that they had built something that not even the most ruthless ambition could take from them, A true home founded not on contracts, but on daily choices, on shared vulnerability, on the courage to bet on love when everything indicated it was safer to surrender to fear. The leaves on the trees in Central Park were beginning to take on more vibrant hues when Eliza received the news. The bakery had been officially declared a cultural heritage of New York. The framed certification arrived accompanied by a letter from City Hall recognizing its contribution to the preservation of centuries-old culinary traditions. "It's extraordinary," commented Rosemary, caressing the document with fingers trembling with emotion. "Your grandmother would be so proud." They were gathered in the penthouse's dining room, which had gradually transformed over the past months. The minimalist lines remained, but now coexisted with warm elements. Family photographs, poetry books openly displayed on shelves, no longer hidden behind economics tomes, and a growing collection of artisanal ceramics that Eliza had begun to acquire at local fairs. "This deserves a celebration," declared Nathaniel, uncorking a champagne bottle he had been reserving for a special occasion. His transformation was perhaps the most notable of all. The man who 11 months ago routinely worked until midnight now arrived home in time for dinner, had delegated responsibilities to a rebuilt team of trusted people, and dedicated entire Sundays to experimenting with bread recipes alongside Eliza. "To the bakery," Walter toasted, raising his glass with a slightly trembling hand but firm voice. "And to second chances." The look he exchanged with Nathaniel contained an entire universe of unverbalized male understanding. The path to mutual acceptance had been long, from initial distrust to reluctant respect, and finally, a genuine affinity born of shared values that transcended differences in origin and class. After dinner, when Rosemary and Walter had retired to the guest room they now regularly used during their visits, Eliza and Nathaniel remained on the terrace, contemplating the New York horizon under the silvery light of a crescent moon. 11 months, she murmured, leaning against her husband's chest as they shared a lounger. "It seems a lifetime and at the same time a blink." Nathaniel gently buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent of cinnamon and vanilla that she always brought with her from the bakery. 11 months since a trembling young woman entered my life with a marriage contract and transformed everything. Eliza turned to look at him, studying that face she now knew in all its expressions. The fierce concentration when working on important documents, the genuine laughter that had begun to emerge with increasing frequency, the naked vulnerability in moments of intimacy. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, giving voice to a doubt that occasionally still visited her in moments of insecurity. "Marrying me, everything that happened afterwards. Your company suffered considerable losses. Your reputation—" "My reputation was that of a ruthless shark," he softly interrupted, "a man who inspired fear, not genuine respect. As for the economic losses—" He shrugged, a remarkably casual gesture for someone who once calculated every move with mathematical precision. "Money comes and goes. What I found with you is infinitely more valuable." He took her left hand, where the platinum ring, that initial symbol of a cold contract, now represented something completely different. "In a little less than a month, the year stipulated in our original agreement will be completed." Eliza held her breath. They never spoke of the contract, of that clause specifying that after 12 months of marriage, the debt would be cancelled and she would be free of all obligation. "Technically," he continued, with a smile that didn't completely reach his eyes, "you could request an annulment without legal or financial consequences. The bakery is safe, the hospital debt settled, your father recovering." Something in his tone made Eliza's heart constrict. She placed a finger on his lips, gently silencing him. "Is that what you think I'll do, that I'm waiting for the contract to expire?" The vulnerability that crossed Nathaniel's usually composed face was so deep, so genuine, that it took her breath away. "Sometimes," he confessed in a whisper, "I wake up in the middle of the night, watch you sleeping beside me, and wonder how it's possible that someone like you has chosen to stay with someone like me, beyond any contractual obligation." Eliza took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her directly. "Nathaniel Blackwood, listen well. It's been months since I've been here for any contract. I'm here because I chose to be here. Because I chose you with all your complications, your demolished walls, your heart that belatedly learned to trust." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. I love you. Not the magnate, not the powerful man, but the man who makes bread on Sundays, singing folk songs out of tune. The man who leaves poems between the pages of my books. The man who learned that vulnerability isn't weakness, but the deepest form of strength. The transformation on Nathaniel's face was like a dawn, slow, gradual, but inevitably luminous. Without words, he extracted from his jacket pocket a small blue velvet box. "I was going to wait until our anniversary," he said with a slightly trembling voice, "to ask you to renew our vows. Not as a contract this time, but as a choice. A true promise." He opened the box, revealing a white gold ring with small sapphires, forming a delicate pattern resembling the swirl of a perfectly kneaded bread dough. "Would you marry me again, Eliza? This time for all the right reasons?" Her laughter mixed with tears of joy as she extended her hand. "We're already married, silly." "Technically," he replied, sliding the ring alongside the platinum one, "but we never had a honeymoon. I was thinking of Florence. There are centuries-old bakeries there that might interest you." Eliza kissed him then, a kiss that contained promises, shared memories, and a future that stretched before them, not as a predefined path, but as a blank canvas they would paint together, day by day. "Florence sounds perfect," she murmured against his lips. "But first we have a bakery to expand and a ceremony to plan, one where we truly say what we feel." Under the starry New York sky, intertwined like the strands of a well-worked dough, they sealed that silent promise to build something no contract could ever capture. A shared life, freely chosen each dawn, with full awareness of both its imperfections and its incomparable beauty. The eve of their first wedding anniversary dawned with a soft drizzle over New York, as if the sky itself wanted to cleanse the city for the occasion. At the bakery, now expanded to include a small cultural cafe and a room where traditional baking workshops were held, activity began as always with the first light. Eliza kneaded silently, lost in her thoughts. The year that had passed seemed simultaneously an eye blink and an eternity. So much had changed since that night in the hotel suite, when her trembling hands had been enveloped by those of a stranger who now knew every corner of her soul. "Thinking about tomorrow?" Mason's voice interrupted her reflections. Her brother had flourished during the past months, discovering an unexpected passion for pastry innovation that perfectly complemented the traditional techniques Eliza preserved. Hartwell Blackwood Bakery, as it was now officially called, was developing a reputation for blending the old and the new in ways that attracted both purists and seekers of innovative culinary experiences. "About everything," she replied with a smile. "About how we got here, about what comes next." Mason nodded, understanding. Since the announcement of the vow renewal 2 months ago, the entire family had been immersed in preparations for an intimate but meaningful celebration, so different from the cold and formal ceremony of the year before. "Have you finished your vows?" he asked, while beginning to prepare the dough for his famous sourdough with rosemary that had become the neighborhood sensation. Eliza shook her head. "Every time I try to write them, they seem insufficient. How do you condense all this into words?" "Maybe you don't need elaborate words," suggested her brother, with a wisdom that continued to surprise her. "Maybe you just need the simple truth." The doorbell interrupted the conversation. Both turned, surprised by a customer so early, but it wasn't a customer who entered. Victoria Blackwood remained at the threshold, her elegant and tense figure contrasting with the bakery's warm and rustic environment. At 43, her resemblance to Nathaniel was undeniable, the same penetrating eyes, the same proud posture. But where he had developed warmth, she seemed to have hardened even more. "Good morning," she said with a controlled voice. "I'm looking for Eliza Hartwell, or Blackwood, as you prefer to call yourself now." Mason stepped forward, instinctively protective. "My sister is busy." "No, it's all right," intervened Eliza, wiping her hands on her apron. She stood up straight, facing the woman who had tried to destroy Nathaniel, the bakery, everything they loved. "I'm Eliza Blackwood. How can I help you?" Victoria's eyes scanned her from head to toe, evaluating her with clinical coldness. "So you're the famous baker who tamed my brother." Eliza maintained her composure. "I haven't tamed anyone. Your brother evolved by himself, as we all could do." A flash of something, surprise, reluctant respect, crossed Victoria's face. "I need to talk to you in private. Mason began to protest, but Eliza stopped him with a gesture. "It's fine. You can use that time to call Nathaniel." Addressing Victoria, she added, "Let's talk in the cafe. We haven't opened yet, we'll be alone." The small space attached to the bakery maintained the rustic but welcoming aesthetic that characterized the entire establishment. Eliza guided her unexpected visitor to a table in the most private corner and sat across from her without offering coffee or courtesies. The situation didn't require them. "I'll get straight to the point," Victoria began, after a brief silence. "Tomorrow, you renew your vows." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Eliza nodded without commenting. "My brother and I haven't spoken in over a year," continued Victoria, her fingers nervously tapping on the wooden table. "Not since I tried—" She paused, visibly composing herself. "Since the Chicago incident." "The incident that almost destroyed him," Eliza specified calmly. "That almost destroyed everything he had built." Victoria held her gaze without blinking. "I have my reasons." "We always do," replied Eliza. "The question is whether those reasons justify the damage we cause." A tense silence settled between both women, so different in appearance and circumstances, but united by their connection to the same man. "I came because—" Victoria seemed to struggle with each word, as if extracting them from within required a physical effort. "Because I want to understand what my brother saw in you, what was so powerful as to transform him in that way." The question took Eliza by surprise. She expected threats, perhaps manipulation attempts, but not this almost vulnerable curiosity. "It wasn't me who transformed him," she replied, after a reflective pause. "It was his own desire to change, to break destructive patterns. I just showed him it was possible." Victoria studied her with almost scientific intensity. "Do you know why I hated him so much? Why I tried to destroy him? He thinks it's for the money, for power." A bitter laugh escaped Victoria's perfectly painted lips. "Money never mattered to me. What I couldn't forgive was that he saved me again and again, and then judged me when I made mistakes. His damn perfection, his control, as if he were invulnerable." "He's not invulnerable," said Eliza softly. "He's deeply human with all his imperfections and wounds. Like you, like all of us." Something in those simple words seemed to penetrate Victoria's defenses. For an instant, her mask of coldness cracked, revealing the wounded girl who had once completely depended on her older brother to survive. "He's here," she said then, looking over Eliza's shoulder. Indeed, Nathaniel stood at the cafe entrance, his face an impenetrable mask, as he observed his wife and his sister seated together. The years of conflict, betrayal, and pain seemed to materialize in the space between the siblings. "Victoria," he finally said, his voice controlled but not hostile, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Nor did I expect to come," she replied, rising with studied elegance. "I just wanted to meet the woman who achieved what I never could, making you happy." The comment, loaded with contradictory meanings, floated in the air between them. Eliza observed the exchange, aware of witnessing something deeply private, almost sacred in its intensity. "And?" asked Nathaniel, taking a step toward his sister. "What's your verdict?" Victoria looked at Eliza one last time, and something like a genuine smile briefly softened her features. "I think you finally found someone who sees the man, not the magnate. Someone who isn't dazzled or intimidated by what you've built." She approached her brother, stopping one step away. From her purse, she extracted a thick envelope. "This is a wedding gift, I suppose, or an anniversary one. The complete documentation of my shares in the group's European subsidiaries. I'm transferring them to your name, without conditions." Nathaniel didn't take the envelope immediately. "Why now?" "Because I'm tired," she replied with sudden honesty. "Tired of feeding this hatred, of spending my life trying to destroy yours. Perhaps it's time to try to build something of my own." Finally, Nathaniel took the envelope. His fingers briefly brushed his sister's, the first physical contact between them in over a year. "You should come tomorrow," he said, surprising both Eliza and Victoria. "To the ceremony. It's small, just family and close friends." "Family?" The word sounded fragile on Victoria's lips. "You always have been," he replied, with a vulnerability Eliza recognized as genuine, "even in our worst moments." Victoria nodded, unable to respond verbally. With a farewell gesture toward Eliza, she left the cafe and the bakery, her figure gradually fading into the drizzle that continued falling over New York. When they were alone, Nathaniel approached Eliza, his eyes full of unformulated questions. "She came to me," explained Eliza, taking his hands. "She wanted to understand." "And what did she understand?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Eliza smiled, caressing his cheek with infinite tenderness. "That some things cannot be bought or controlled. That true value isn't in possessing, but in belonging, in creating bonds that transcend contracts and agreements." And there, in the small cafe attached to the bakery that had been the catalyst for their unlikely love story, they sealed with a kiss the promise of the following day. Not a new beginning, but the conscious continuation of a shared path, with all its imperfections, challenges, and unexpected joys. The vow renewal ceremony was held at sunset, in the garden of a small estate on the outskirts of New York. There was no ostentation or excessive luxury, just an authentic beauty that reflected the evolution of their relationship. Wildflowers in handcrafted ceramic vases, unpolished wooden tables covered with natural linen tablecloths, soft lights suspended from the century-old trees that surrounded the space. The guests, barely 30 people between close family and intimate friends, conversed animatedly while waiting for the ceremony to begin. Walter, notably recovered though still leaning on a carved wooden cane, shared anecdotes with former bakery customers who had become part of the extended family. Rosemary supervised with a critical eye the final details of the dessert table, where a selection of the most emblematic creations of Hartwell Blackwood Bakery was proudly displayed. Mason, elegant in a simple but perfectly tailored suit, a gift from Nathaniel, chatted animatedly with Phoebe, Nathaniel's personal assistant, who had been instrumental during the previous year's crisis and now formed an indispensable part of the reorganized management team. And in a discreet corner of the garden, observing the scene with an indecipherable expression, Victoria remained alone, elegant in a midnight blue dress, holding a champagne glass she had barely tasted. Inside the house, in a room illuminated by the golden light of the New York sunset, Eliza contemplated her reflection in the antique mirror. She had chosen a simple dress of raw silk in an ivory color, without excessive adornments or complications. Her hair, gathered in a low bun, was adorned only with small white flowers freshly cut from the garden. "You're beautiful," Nathaniel's voice surprised her. She turned to find him at the threshold, handsome in a dark grey suit with a simple white shirt without a tie. He carried in his hand a small package wrapped in artisanal paper. "They say the groom shouldn't see the bride before the ceremony," she reminded him with a smile. "Technically," he replied, approaching, "we're already married. And we broke all the conventional rules from the beginning, don't you think?" Eliza nodded, recalling how far they had come from that first encounter, from that cold and formal handshake that had sealed a commercial agreement disguised as marriage. "I have something for you," said Nathaniel, extending the package. "Something I wanted to give you before the ceremony, in private." With slightly trembling fingers, Eliza unwrapped the gift to find a small carved wooden box. Upon opening it, she held her breath. Inside, on a bed of blue velvet, rested an antique silver brooch with intricate floral motifs. "It was my mother's," explained Nathaniel, his voice laden with contained emotion. "The only thing I keep from her. She saved it for me before leaving. My father never knew of its existence." Eliza caressed the jewel with reverence, conscious of the deep meaning of the gesture. "Nathaniel, I can't accept something so personal." "That's precisely why you must accept it," he gently interrupted, "because it represents everything you've meant in my life, the recovery of parts of me that I believed lost forever, the capacity to trust, to be vulnerable, to love without reservation." He took the brooch and carefully pinned it on Eliza's dress, right over her heart. The contrast of the antique silver against the raw silk was as beautiful as it was symbolic. The old and the new, the wound and the healing, the past and the future intertwined. "I've been thinking," he continued, taking her hands in his, "about everything we've lived through this year, about how we began and where we are now, and I realized something fundamental." "What?" she asked, moved by the intensity of his gaze. "That we saved each other mutually. It wasn't just that you rescued me from my loneliness, from my inability to trust. I also gave you something you needed, the opportunity to discover your own strength, Your capacity to transform not only my life, but that of your entire family." Eliza nodded, recognizing the deep truth in his words. From a commercial agreement to this, who would have imagined? No one, he smiled. And that's what makes it so extraordinary. A soft knock on the door announced it was time to begin. Mason peeked in, smiling to see them together. "Everyone's ready," he announced. "Are you?" Eliza and Nathaniel exchanged a glance loaded with silent promises. "More than ever," they responded in unison. The ceremony was simple but deeply emotional. Under an arch of wildflowers before their loved ones, they exchanged vows that hadn't been written on paper, but engraved in the heart through shared experiences, overcome challenges, and a love that had blossomed in the most unlikely terrain. "When I met you," said Nathaniel, his voice clear and firm despite the emotion, "I thought I knew exactly what I was buying. A marriage of convenience, a solution to a business problem, an appearance of normality in my perfectly organized life. I never imagined I was really obtaining a complete revolution of my existence." Soft laughter ran through the audience as he continued. "You taught me that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or properties. That control is an illusion, and that vulnerability, that thing I feared so much, is actually the door to the deepest connection a human being can experience." He took Eliza's hands in his, that gesture that had marked the beginning of their story and now symbolized its conscious continuation. "I promise you, not as businessman Nathaniel Blackwood, but as the imperfect and always evolving man that I am, that each day I will choose to love you. I will choose honesty over appearance, authenticity over convenience, and true connection over the illusory security I once valued above all else." When it was Eliza's turn, her voice was soft but firm, carrying a conviction that moved all present. "I entered this marriage for the wrong reasons," she began, "driven by desperation and family duty. I expected at best a cordial agreement with a stranger. At worst, a golden cage I would have to endure for the sake of those I loved." Her eyes, bright with contained emotion, didn't stray from Nathaniel's as she continued. "What I found instead was a traveling companion, someone who, beneath layers of distrust and control, hid a heart as hungry for genuine connection as my own. Someone who read poetry in secret and sang folk songs while kneading bread. Knowing smiles were exchanged among the guests who knew this recently discovered facet of the once intimidating magnate. I promise you," continued Eliza, "that I will continue to challenge you when necessary, support you when you need it, and love you in all your versions. The brilliant businessman, the apprentice baker, the nighttime reader of Whitman. I promise to remind you, in the difficult moments that will inevitably come, that we are stronger together than apart, that our differences aren't obstacles, but complements, and that true love isn't a destination, but a path we walk each day, choice after choice." When the celebrant invited them to seal their promises, their lips met in a kiss that contained all their shared history, the fears overcome, the betrayals forgiven, the joys discovered, and above all the promise of a future built on authentic foundations. The sun was setting over New York when the celebration continued with an informal dinner, where guests shared anecdotes and spontaneous toasts. The bakery had provided all the breads and sweets, including a special version of the traditional sourdough that was now the family business's trademark. At one point, Eliza noticed Nathaniel conversing in a secluded corner with Victoria. The initial tension had given way to a cautious but genuine interaction. Not complete reconciliation, perhaps, but a first step toward healing old wounds. Later, when the music began to play, Nathaniel took Eliza's hand for the first dance. As they moved gently under the stars, he whispered in her ear, "Do you know what I thought the first time I saw you? That this would be a convenient arrangement?" she joked. "No," he replied with unexpected seriousness. "I thought, this woman has eyes that don't know how to lie." And it terrified me because I had spent my entire adult life surrounded by people who mastered the art of deception, beginning with myself. Eliza rested her head on his shoulder, allowing the music to gently rock them. "And now? Now I think that your honesty was the most valuable gift I could receive. It forced me to confront my own lies, beginning with the biggest one, that I didn't need anyone." The party continued until late at night, but they slipped away earlier, walking hand in hand through the gardens illuminated by the moon. They stopped beside an old maple tree, its twisted trunks testimony to decades of resistance and adaptation. "It reminds me of us," commented Eliza, caressing the rough bark. "It's not perfect or conventional. It grew adapting to circumstances, finding its way despite obstacles." Nathaniel embraced her from behind, his arms enveloping her with that combination of strength and gentleness he had learned to balance during the past year. "Do you know what's most extraordinary?" he murmured against her hair. "That this is just the beginning." And as the night enveloped them in its starry mantle, their hands intertwined again, not with the tremor of uncertainty that had marked their first encounter, but with the tranquil firmness of those who have found, against all odds, exactly where they belong. In the years that followed, Hartwell Blackwood Bakery expanded to 3 locations in different New York neighborhoods, each preserving the artisanal and community spirit that had defined it from its beginnings. Nathaniel gradually reduced his participation in the corporate world to dedicate more time to initiatives that combined business with social purpose. Eliza developed an educational program that recovered baking traditions at risk of disappearing. And each morning, without fail, they shared the first coffee of the day alongside freshly baked bread, their hands intertwined on the table, hands that no longer trembled with uncertainty, but vibrated with the certainty of having found in each other the home they had always sought. Because in the end, they discovered the simplest yet deepest truth, that true love isn't a contract one signs, but a commitment renewed each day, not a transaction completed, but a connection deepened with each challenge overcome and each joy shared.